Hey listeners, Catherine here. Before we get started with episode 78, I wanted to let you know about PDX SOS. Micro enterprises make up the engine of our economy. While Portland's small businesses are experiencing temporary closures during the COVID-19 pandemic, PDX SOS encourages Portlanders to make the pledge to shop, dine, and support the small independent businesses that make our city so amazing and special. Here's how you can help. Head over to pdxsos.com to purchase a gift certificate from your favorite local and independent boutiques, restaurants, service providers, and more. The members of PDX SOS would like to thank the Portland community for their ongoing support. And now, time for the show. Hello, and welcome to episode 78 of The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. We are recording this episode during a time of civil unrest and COVID-19 stay-at-home orders, so you might be surprised that we wanted to devote an episode to the vegan movement. But I think once you hear our discussion, you'll see why veganism plays a part in the current conversation. I can't wait to dig in, but first, let's meet our panelists. The Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter is an assistant professor at the University of San Diego, member of the board of Farm Forward, and the author of the forthcoming book, The Spirit of Soul Food. Thanks so much for joining us, Reverend Dr. Carter.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And Talia Pollock is the YouTuber, podcaster, and author behind Party in My Plants. Hi, Talia.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Waz Wu is a food blogger who contributes to Eater and runs Veganizer PDX. Hi, Waz. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Catherine. Good to be here.
All right, guys, let's dig into our first topic, veganism and the COVID crisis. Since the COVID-19 quarantine began, we've been seeing some very different consumer behavior in regards to food. We've been reading about food shortages, long lines at food banks, and outbreaks of illness in meat processing plants. Meanwhile, people are planting quarantine gardens, cooking at home, preparing a lot of beans and lentils, and beginning to focus very seriously on their health. Reverend Dr. Carter, I'd love to start with you on this topic. Are you seeing this moment as a moment when people might be turning to a vegan diet, and why?
Yeah, I think it's been really fascinating to see how the COVID crisis has impacted our supply chains, particularly how it's impacted, obviously, what we're getting from farmers and so what's available at the stores, right? You know, we had so much panic buying early on. They really forced people to kind of shift what they were used to eating and try different and new things. One of the things I always find fascinating is how I think this idea of veganism can be framed and portrayed as something that's expensive or even something that's time consuming. And I'm sure we're going to get to that later on. And while parts of that may be true, depending on what it is you're making, any kind of diet can be expensive and time consuming depending on what you want to cook. But for me, right, I grew up with a grandfather who was a migrant picker. He was a farmer. And for most of his life, up until he was in his mid-20s and moved from Mississippi to Michigan, his move out of the Jim Crow South to like the Midwest to get a factory job, he practiced, for the most part, vegetarian diet because that's all he could get his hands on, right? Like that's all that was just there. Since he worked on farms, he had access to like eggs and bread and dairy, but he wasn't eating meat every day because it just wasn't something they could afford to get or something they had access to. And so with respect to this crisis, I think we're seeing a similar outcome, right? Where some of the most basic staples are the things that are available. It's things that people already know how to make and things you can make in bunches. And so it is causing people to have to be more creative and to figure out, okay, how might I have to change what it is I'm making? How might I adjust the recipe? How might I be able to make enough food that can last a few days? Because now I'm working from home and my kids are at home. I'm trying to be their teacher and their parent and trying to stay married at the same time and have all these different things going on, and so it's raising it's made cooking, which for me has always been a joy, to a certain degree a little bit of a chore. And so trying to figure out ways to navigate this space, I found that you see people getting the crock pot out, getting the instant pot out, and making these vegan dishes or making dishes in general that can last a long time. The last thing I'll say is this was the first time since in my life where I would go to the store and, like you said, lentils were gone, or like farro, like things that I normally never worry about anybody buying. All of a sudden was gone because people were just buying everything up. So it has been an interesting, I think, shift in America's dietary practices as a result of the crisis.
I love that. And I love your point about creativity coming out of scarcity, because we've seen that over and over throughout history with artistic movements as well. And I was able to take a little sneak peek at your forthcoming book, The Spirit of Soul Food, in which you make that interesting connection between scarcity, sort of being forced to work with a certain group of ingredients and then getting really creative with them and creating this, this whole beautiful cuisine out of that. Waz, are you seeing interesting vegan creativity coming out of this crisis?
So one thing that I noticed immediately was when I went to the grocery store, it's always out of tofu. Brown rice is gone. Nutritional yeast is gone.
Wow.
I think a lot of people are just adapting to a vegan diet, even if they don't intend to go vegan entirely. So a lot of these vegan staples are very affordable and very easy to stock up on and have at home. So I think that everyone should go more in this direction instead of worrying about hoarding meat. I've heard people talk about wanting to buy an extra freezer just to stock up on meat, and that doesn't make sense at all. Like, as if meat is not available, then just change the way you eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're hearing so much more about not only the conditions for the animals, but the conditions for the workers who are being exposed to COVID in really dangerous ways because of their working conditions. And it really makes, I think, a lot of people who were eating a little meat before very turned off by the idea of it. Talia, I'm wondering, I've been listening to your podcast a little, and it's so uplifting, and it's kind of about it's not just about cooking, it's about coping, it's about betterment. And I'm wondering if your vegan cooking or your vegan lifestyle has sort of helped you during this crisis when you've been stuck at home and quarantined.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's interesting is I'm kind of seeing the opposite of what everyone else just said among my community. Like, I've been seeing a lot of people coming now to the plants after, 8 weeks of eating so unhealthfully that now they feel so lousy and they're like, okay, fine, I'm ready to cook healthfully. How do I do it? I think in the beginning, at least really in my neck of the woods, it was all about just cooking all this indulgent food. And now people are realizing that, like, that's not a sustainable way to feel your best. And that's what I talk a ton about on my podcast, about how, in my viewpoint, the main reason, the catalyst for me in eating the plants and eating this way was to feel good and to improve my energy so I could then be more alive and more productive and more awesome in the rest of my life. And so I think now, as we're, like you said, juggling homeschooling and our jobs and learning Zoom and, everything else that's going on, and it's such a chaotic, stressful, overwhelming time, now is the time to be putting the good fuel in your body so your output in the rest of your life can be awesome and you can keep up. So that's kind of the shift that I'm seeing with people, is that, like, they're like, oh, I get it. The better I eat, the better I can live. So, like, let's go.
And do any of you feel like you just kind of, every time you read the news, something about COVID, you kind of nod and say, yeah, we've been saying this for years. Like, it's really unfortunate. A lot of people have pre-existing health conditions, and, probably if they'd been following a vegan diet, they wouldn't be struggling so much with their health. The outbreak, first came from a wet market where, animals were being, I believe, sold to be killed and eaten. Do any of you kind of feel like you're just sort of shaking your head and saying to yourself, well, I kind of told you this was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a global wake up call that we have to always prioritize our health, because sometimes, it's people aren't, if you don't have a condition, like I came into the plant-based lifestyle through having IBS and struggling for 8 years with my health. So I needed immediate relief. And when I found the plants, it gave me that relief. But some people who are just like, oh yeah, like eat for longevity, eat for like whatever, if they don't reap the tangible benefits, they don't really feel motivated to do it. But I think now it's been such a wake-up call that everybody is really hopping on board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, especially with respect to how things are evolving with regards to like the wet market, how the coronavirus outbreak started. And maybe, I know me personally, being in Southern California, I'm in a really strong, vegan community. So I don't have to search far to have people that have common, interest in terms of why they practice veganism to a certain degree. But at the same time, so I'm not the kind of person to be like, oh, I've been telling you this for years, this is what you should have been doing, because I found that approach not to be effective to persuade people. However, it is a time when I can actually have a conversation with someone about how the pandemic started, right? To say, hey, it started in a wet market. It started when people are slaughtering, animals at a market, and it's a infectious disease that transmits from animals to humans, and then obviously to the rest of the world. So how might we want to think more critically about the fact that we have these places, or the fact that we have, as you mentioned, meatpacking plants or factory farms that where the vast majority of people who work there, are people of color, who are those who get infected, and they're bringing it back to their communities. And then when we see how COVID is already disproportionately impacting people of color, because even though for many people our lives don't seem to matter, we definitely seem to matter with regards to being essential workers, right? So you have this. So my home state's in Michigan, and I have to, confess that this was a really difficult thing for me to watch, to have these people protesting for stores opening because they want to go get a haircut, or they want to, go do lots of other things. If you read the signs, some of them were actually pretty funny if they weren't so stupid. Well, there was one where a guy said he wanted to go to the strip club, and I was like, you know what? At least he's honest, but that's just kind of tacky. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just kind of tacky. But you have these people with like guns claiming, I want to have freedom to die. But really what it is, it's really, you want to have freedom to continue to marginalize people whose health has already been in jeopardy because of the pre-existing conditions that people of color more often have, because of the racism we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so for me, these things are so interlocking. But this has been a perfect opportunity for me to begin having those conversations with people who otherwise weren't interested in having the conversation.
Yeah, and the effects just go on and on. I mean, it's not just the conditions for the people in the factories, but it's the fact that their homes are nearby these processing plants and these factory farms, and so all the toxins are, in the air right near them. And I mean, it just compounds upon itself once you start reading, which is what I've been doing over the past week, and getting really, really depressed. And yeah, I mean, I think this is a great moment to just reflect upon our diets and what the impact is, not only on our own health, but on the planet's health and on society. Waz, I'm curious, what are you seeing in the restaurant world? I know you cover restaurants. Are you seeing a shift to plant-based cooking in a way? Because, meat and seafood are perishable.
I feel like every time I open Eater and look at what some of the other publications are talking about, like there's always news about restaurants closing. And a lot of restaurants are trying to pivot to some kind of takeout model. I think that a lot of them are embracing more plants, especially as we are getting into summer produce right now. But a lot of places are still serving a lot of meat. I wish that they would switch more to a plant-heavy diet as well. Oh, and you mentioned wet markets earlier, and I suddenly thought of this childhood memory. So I grew up in Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, and occasionally I would accompany my mom to the wet markets. And I remember there was one time, it was the middle of summer, and it was hot, it was humid, there were all these smells, it was sensory overload, and I had to get out of the wet market. Like, I was about to throw up. It was just so awful to just be there for a few minutes. So I can't even imagine what it's like for the animals in the market and for the people working in the market. Those just are not acceptable conditions for anyone to be in.
Yeah, I've been to one in, I think it was in Beijing, and it was pretty depressing. But, I think also maybe those of us who just buy meat packaged in the grocery store and don't really have to think about it, maybe we should all go to a wet market and kind of look dinner in the eyes and see if we still want to eat that way. I don't know.
I think that people are finally doing a lot that they've been avoiding doing, like cooking, learning how to be comfortable in the kitchen. They have no other choice now. At least in the beginning, I'm here in New York, so we closed down big time and early. So in the beginning for us, you couldn't get takeout or anything. And so people are finally learning to get comfortable in the kitchen. And I think in a way that is, in a huge way, that's so empowering for so many people who felt very lost. And for that, I'm uplifted. I'm hopeful that this doesn't just stop once restaurants come back to normal, that people can take their newfound capabilities and really move forward, knowing that they are in control of putting good stuff into their body.
Yeah.
Talia, that was one thing that I really appreciated about your website and just your book and the things I read was, for me, cooking is so much it's a practice. It is a contemplative practice. It's something I do to remember my ancestors, but also something I really just enjoy doing, And I think one thing, even with the title of your book, Party in My Plants, which just makes me laugh every time I say it, it's just, I think that you really do capture that essence of joy that I think sometimes we often view cooking as a chore. Right. And there's a lot of reasons that's wrapped up in gender norms that I can't speak to nearly as well as perhaps you all can. But you're trying to recapture that in a way in which is like, no, this actually can be fun. It can be a way we can connect with our families and connect with our bodies. And so I think that's an excellent point that people are trying to enjoy cooking again. So thank you for doing that work. I really loved reading about it.
Oh, I so deeply appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word chore, Reverend Dr. Carter, because I feel like when people think about veganism in particular, they kind of roll their eyes and oh, those vegans are so boring. But I feel like on Instagram and in other social media platforms, I'm seeing all these really beautiful, colorful, exciting vegan recipes that are getting me super excited about it. And I feel like quarantine is getting people focused on this. Waz, are you getting an uptick of interest in your blog and your posts during the quarantine?
A little bit. I think that everyone is very much focused on social media right now, and I would credit social media for the growth of veganism over the last few years. I think that something as simple as posting a photo of your delicious, colorful vegan dinner is a form of activism, and it's right there at your fingertips. It's easy to share with your friends, and I think that's a great way to get people excited and talking about food and nourishing, healthy food.
And you said the word activism. That was the perfect segue to our next topic. But we have to take a short break and talk about our sponsor. Okay, folks, I'm so excited we have two sponsors. And first, I would like to thank our longtime sponsor, Zupan's Markets. They're in the Portland area, and they are offering a personal shopping and curbside pickup service. You can call or order online and pick up anything from a flower arrangement to a ready-to-heat dinner for 4. Order by noon for same-day pickup between 3 and 7 p.m. And since we are recording a vegan episode, I checked out their vegetarian ready-to-heat dinner option, and right now that's green garbanzo falafel cakes, hummus, baba ganoush, dolmas, mixed olives, and Greek salad and pita bread. That's a delicious Mediterranean veg dinner, and it looks yummy. Everything from the fresh seafood and meat to the produce, the prepared dishes, and fresh baked goods is of the highest quality there. And of course, as you all know, I love browsing the wine selection. Whether you're looking for a beautiful flower arrangement, a small gift, or carefully curated foods, it's a real pleasure to shop there. Founded by John Zupan in 1975 and now run by his son Mike, Zupan's is Portland's family-owned grocery store with 3 locations in Portland and Lake Oswego. Visit zupans.com and sign up for the email list to receive exclusive deals and promotions. Thanks so much, Zupans. Okay, and now it's time for our next course. Is veganism a social movement? I think you would all answer this question in very different ways because it sounds like you all come to veganism from different directions. But at the same time, I feel like you have something deep in common that really binds you, and it's veganism. So, Waz Wu, let's start with you. You founded and run the Portland chapter of a group called Veganizer. And I'm curious, can you just tell us, what does Veganizer do? What is Veganizer?
So Veganizer was the concept was started in New York City. I run the Portland chapter, and each chapter works a little differently, but the basic idea is that we work with omnivore restaurants to host officially veganized pop-ups. What I'm seeing is a lot of restaurants in Portland already have vegan options on the menu, but the vegan community might not know about them. So it's a great way to connect the two. And I think that people trust the Veganizer name, and there are a lot of people who come back to our pop-ups again and again. And I've noticed that our pop-ups are attended by vegans, vegetarians, omnivores. So it really is about bringing people together to enjoy food.
What a great idea. And I saw on your website the term restaurant flip. What does that mean, a restaurant flip?
Some of the other chapters have gotten restaurants to go entirely vegan. Over here, I think the Veganizer concept started when our founder got a paleo restaurant to go completely vegan, and that was the foundational groundwork. It's crazy.
Wow.
Here in Portland, we're doing vegan pop-ups, and when I contact a restaurant and start the conversation with them, I position it as an opportunity to get creative in the kitchen, to celebrate seasonal produce, and to reach a new audience that's already been here in Portland. Sometimes we work with food carts that have 2 people running the cart. Other times we work with more upscale restaurants that want to do a 5-course dinner. So there's a really wide range in how these events happen.
I love this, Waz, because I feel like back when I was a kid, people would say, oh, those crazy activist vegans, they're throwing paint on people in fur coats and, making a scene in public, and no one wants to be a vegan because they're cuckoo or whatever. And now today, I love that activism, you were saying before, activism is posting beautiful photographs of beautiful recipes on Instagram. Activism is working with a restaurant to create a really beautiful menu that people are going to enjoy, that highlights seasonal produce. It just seems like a very positive form of activism right now. What are all the rest of you seeing in terms of the way vegan activism has changed?
I am probably a little bit different in terms of how I came to it. I know you kind of mentioned that. I didn't have any dietary issues necessarily. For me, it was more of a conscious decision over time. But my veganism, or my conversion, I guess you want to say, to veganism, it didn't come out of a compassion for animals, like I would say for many people, or some people come to it, as Talia mentioned, because of their bodies just feel better in this particular way. For me, it had to do with kind of some of the things I mentioned in the last segment with regards to the interconnectedness of marginalization and oppression. And so I mentioned my grandfather earlier, and I think his story is on my mother's side really influenced me because he experienced such deep and profound racism growing up in Jim Crow, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and the way he was treated by people who owned the farms and the people he worked for, and those stories he told me growing up, and that just kind of always stayed with me. So I was always interested in like farm worker activism and advocacy, and it wasn't until I was in graduate school where I made the connection of the treatment of animals and seeing like pictures. Probably the scariest book I read, not scary, but a book that really had an impact on me was Marjorie Spiegel's Dreaded Comparison. We see these pictures of enslaved Africans and animals, and kind of how the dehumanization of Black bodies, it's really powerful, and it immediately forced me to really think critically about what I still consume animals like, and for me it became as a move to really be in solidarity with my grandfather, but as a move, as I understand it, to really be human centered. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's really to me about an anti-oppression kind of way of eating. And so while my wife is actually she is a veterinarian, and so I have animals. I love animals. I'm not saying I'm anti-animal, but what I am saying is I think about the ways in which Black people have experienced a kind of animalization over time, and so for me, that impact has pushed me towards practicing a vegan diet that I really identify more as Black veganism. So I don't even necessarily call it like just traditional veganism. And I use that descriptor to kind of talk about how, for me, it's a socially conscious way of thinking and eating. Because often I would talk to vegans in different places where, they're not mindful of so they'll talk about a factory farm and they'll talk about the animals and not talk about the people. As you mentioned earlier, they're not talking about the people that live in those communities, people who work in those plants, and the people who have to deal with the outcomes of that and the systemic racism that even exists within a plant, right? There's a brilliant New York Times article that came out, I want to say in 2008, called "At the Slaughterhouse, Some Things Never Die," and it's about a factory farm, a hog slaughterhouse in North Carolina, and just the structural racism in terms of who's in charge. It's mostly white men. Who gets to go to what particular line? Who gets to do what? And it just tells you the way this is deeply embedded in this system, not only in the factory farm, but also in just agriculture in general. And so for me, moving to a plant-based diet, buying things directly from farmers was much more about being in solidarity for the preservation and promotion of the Black community and communities writ large, Black and brown communities who are these farmers and these factory workers, and recognizing for me that I didn't want to be complicit in their suffering anymore. So it's deeply socio-political for me.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's real. I didn't know most of that. So thank you for enlightening me. That's wow.
And most people, I shouldn't say most. Well, yeah, most people don't.
Most
So
people don't. I
yeah,
don't know any. I mean, I know a lot of plant eaters, and no one talks about that. So I'm glad you're making it more widespread. Wow.
Thank you. It's and some of that's because, again, my ancestry is in the South. My ancestry is in people who still around, who are in these spaces. I'm in California, where if you drive through the Central California, you see these farms, and these are my people. And I think I need to be their voice as best as I can. And I think sharing this message is one way I think we can inspire people to practice veganism, recognizing that it's not just about the animals. It is about the animals, but it's also about the environment. It's about people. It's about how we feel. It's all these things. It's so deeply interconnected. And it's that story that we can really share about this kind of mutual uplift. And so it can be a kind of positive thing. It doesn't have to be this absence of meat, right? This thing we think, oh, it's scarcity. It's this positive thing. We're actually empowering and helping people and giving people opportunity to flourish and be lifted up. And if you think about it like that, it's not so hard to, not eat steak.
It's literally the best thing for everybody involved. Everything, everybody, every system. Like there's only pros, no cons.
I love that you talk about it as like empowerment for everyone involved, not just the animals. I think that's a really strong statement.
Thank you. I mean, I think people might argue, and I think it's a well-established argument, that what are you going to do with those people who are working in those jobs? If they lose their jobs, what do you do? This is why I'm such a big proponent of small-scale local farms where people actually make a living wage. People, I think, didn't complain when we moved from typewriters to computers and in the typewriter factory closed, right? They went into other industries. And I think so many people in these places would much prefer to work in agriculture in a way that's healthy, sustainable, that's uplifting, that actually allows them to have a craft and not have to worry about bringing home COVID-19. There's all so there's a way in which this can be beneficial for all of us if we really just want to be creative and think about it that way.
I have to say, while you've been speaking, you've been so profound and so moving, and I've been hearing the beautiful birds in your garden as you've been speaking. Yeah. I feel it's been very moving.
That was on purpose.
I know. I love what you're saying, and I've been reading a bit, and I think in the case of both Gandhi and Coretta Scott King, their reasoning for going vegan was that it was the next logical step in a non-violent lifestyle. I mean, it's if your message is peace, this is the way to express it with your everyday decisions with your body.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about being consistent and just modeling who you want to be, and I think that works well in my community and the spaces I travel in and the predominantly Black and brown spaces I inhibit. It's easier for me to talk about it that way. I'm not too familiar with the vegan movement in New York, Talia, but I suspect, like, especially in the circles I imagine you're running, based on what you just said, like, you know, I think veganism in some of these spaces can be portrayed as like still has that kind of taint of I'm going to throw paint on a building, or it's just all white women, right, who are vegan. And I imagine I mean, that's just, it's a stereotype, but it's rooted in some truth. So
No, we
I
laugh
imagine
at
that's
truth. We all laugh because it's true, literally.
so so I think the political nature of it is somewhat contextual as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my neck of the woods, it's trendy. It's still in the realm of trendiness. So, yeah, I think people haven't really found that deeper meaning and really the idea of why to do this. Besides, like, a lot of vegan restaurants have the best interior designers. Like, there's a much bigger impact that I think we all need to be much more educated on, and that's why I'm grateful for your work.
I'm curious, Talia and Waz, how would you kind of classify? I don't know. It sounds like there are different ways to get into veganism, different sort of lanes within veganism. How would you classify your own veganism?
When I first went vegan, it was very much about the animals. Like, I wouldn't eat my cats, so why would I eat other animals? I also grew up in a family that doesn't eat beef, so cutting back on meat wasn't such a big deal for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I started to learn more, I learned about the environmental aspect and the health aspect. And then eventually, like, what really like clicked for me and made me stick to being vegan was, I'm a feminist, and the way that female animals are treated is absolutely appalling. And if my feminism goes beyond human bodies, it has to apply to animals as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that once all of that kind of kicked in for me, it gave food blogging a lot more meaning. It wasn't just about what's the best restaurant to eat at, what are some pretty dishes that I can post. Like, there was something more to it that I could feel good and be passionate about.
How about you, Talia?
Mine came, like I said earlier, through my own health struggles. For 8 years, I felt lousy all the time, and I sought out every healer I could think of, multiple gastroenterologists, naturopathic doctors, chiropractors, acupuncturists, everyone. And all they could really tell me is that I have IBS. And that really just means, like, we don't know what's wrong with you. We've ruled out everything else. Just, good luck. Bye. And I felt lousy, and I wasn't living my life to my fullest potential because my health was impacting my ability to function, as well as my ability to have confidence and joy and positivity. When you have a chronic illness, it's really hard to just, like, be a person. And I discovered in LA the plants. I, sipped a smoothie, and it was all this, like, coconut creamy, amazing smoothie. And it was the first time in those 8 years that I actually ate something that made me feel good.
Well, I guess I had one more question for you all, which is, we're talking about activism and veganism. Do any of you want to share maybe an icon or someone who inspired you to turn to veganism, either someone whose work you read or someone who's just inspired you, who maybe is a leader in the community or nationally or even internationally?
I mean, I think I know I mentioned this earlier. For me, that book, The Dreaded Comparison, by Marjorie Spiegel, was pretty powerful. But that came out like in the late 80s. So it's a pretty old book. The people that I'm most influenced by now are these two sisters, Af and Sil Ko. They co-authored a book called Afroism, Essays on Pop Culture and Feminism. They're the ones that introduced me to the term Black veganism, even though that was something I was already kind of doing. And their work has been really influential on me, and the conversations I've had with them has been really fruitful because the Black vegan space it's growing, but it's not super huge.
Yeah, I was actually checking out her work, and you can check it out on the Black Vegans Rock website, I believe. Did you have an icon or someone who inspired you in particular?
I don't know if it's someone in particular, but I remember when I lived in New York City before moving to Portland, I was a vegetarian then, and I started volunteering for the New York City Vegetarian Food Festival, which is actually entirely vegan, even though it has vegetarian in the name. And when I was going to the festival and working with them, I got to meet a lot of people who were vegan, and they were so supportive and encouraging, and that really helped me take that final leap to cut out eggs and dairy in my diet. And it was really nice to be around people who were not going to judge me because I wasn't 100% vegan yet. And I have met some vegans who aren't quite as supportive and welcoming. But I always credit those people that I met early on for my final transition to veganism.
Great memory. How about you, Talia?
Well, for me, I mean, I didn't even know what vegan was in 2008 when I had that coconut smoothie in LA. I was guided to this restaurant. Someone referred me. I was in the neighborhood and someone said, go across the street, get the smoothie, because I said I was hungry. And then I drank it and I was like, what is this? And they're like, it's vegan. I'm like, what is vegan? So for me, a lot of my early days were spent in restaurants and juice bars. And I have to credit all of those restaurateurs, all these restaurants that made me understand that vegan, planty food can be real food, can be more than just like lettuce on a plate. And also Chris Carr is amazing. She had cancer. She still has cancer. She's thriving with stage 4 cancer and adopted a fully vegan diet and really speaks on behalf of how it helps her health and can help our health too. So she really made me understand that it could be really fun and approachable and easy and doable. And she has great work.
Wow, that's really inspirational.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to take another short break.
Hi, listeners. I'm so excited to talk to you about our sponsor, Laughing Planet. Laughing Planet is a restaurant offering global flavors and tons of vegan options at affordable prices. Laughing Planet believes that a happy planet requires responsible decisions from plant to plate, so they source locally grown ingredients to support small farmers. And they give back so much to the community. During this COVID-19 era, Laughing Planet has been offering free kids' meals to students who otherwise rely on meal assistance programs at schools. I think if you're a parent in the Portland area, you know these restaurants well. My kids and I have always loved Laughing Planet for its quick, nutritious lunches and dinners that you know your kids will actually eat. And full disclosure, I go there by myself all the time. I love the fresh, locally sourced food there. There are multiple locations in the Portland and Vancouver area. I can literally drive to 4 of them without looking up the address on my phone. Yes, I do love Laughing Planet. You can order over the phone for pickup, or you can order delivery online or through DoorDash. Laughing Planet. Check it out, people. It's good stuff. And guess what, folks? If you place an online order, you can get 20% off as a listener of the Foretop. Yes, we are that special. All you have to do is type in the promo code FORTOP. That's FOURTOP when you make your online order with Laughing Planet, and you get 20% off. Thanks so much, Laughing Planet. You guys are an awesome sponsor.
So let's move on to our third course, Navigating the Non-Vegan World. Talia Pollock, your book, Party and Your Plants, as well as your other work, your podcast and your show, present veganism as a diet that bring health and happiness to people, or can bring health and happiness to people, but can be really difficult to fit into non-vegan social settings, such as family meals. How do you counsel people to live a vegan lifestyle without alienating friends and family?
Yeah, so it turns out that a lot of the work that I've been doing with people is actually like confidence work and boldness work and inner strength work, because I think we can all agree that there's really not a shortage of recipes on the internet and through cookbooks. But what really still holds people back from being able to eat healthier in their real everyday life is the social stuff. The fear of, oh my God, if I don't eat my aunt's meatloaf at Thanksgiving, like she's going to be crushed. Or if I pass on my mother-in-law's, brownies, like she's going to disown me. To be the person that at a restaurant orders, with no butter, please, or no dairy, please, for your dish, that actually takes confidence. That takes courage. That takes an unwavering commitment to your own authenticity. And so that's a lot of what I help people with is deciding that like this is my identity and I'm committing to this and I'm going to stay quote unquote on brand no matter what. And I've found in my own life that when I owned it with just love and confidence and that, like I said, authenticity, other people's comments and side eyes and looks and kind of things under their breath, that kind of didn't bother me anymore because I was now more committed to my truth than their judgment. And that's a lot of what I really empower people to do.
Waz, I'm curious how you navigate the world as a restaurant critic. You write about restaurants, you go to events where there's tons of meat everywhere. I know you're here in Portland where, our locally farmed meat is a matter of pride. There are some very well-known charcuterie producers here. Is it tough for you to navigate the restaurant world here?
Sometimes it can be. I often go to media events after I've had a meal at home because I have no idea what I'll be able to eat there or what I'll be covering there. And sometimes the cocktails are the only things that are vegan. I mean, it's hard, but I think Talia has a really good point about how it is about confidence and owning that. And at the end of the day, I don't really care if people don't like me because I'm that weird vegan. I feel like I'm doing the right thing, and it really resonates with me to be passionate about veganism and stick to that. When I first moved here to Portland, I noticed that there's a very strong vegan community. I also noticed there's a very strong food community, and unfortunately, the two don't really overlap as much as they should. Mm-hmm. And I can understand why. Like a lot of vegans don't want to be around all the meaty stuff in the food scene, and it's easier to surround yourself with people that share your same point of view. But I believe if you want to change things, if you want to influence and inspire people, you have to put yourself in a place that might be uncomfortable to you.
Christopher, do you find yourself in conversations with family trying to convince them to go vegan, or what's your approach?
I think my approach is probably a little more casual, I think, to a certain degree. I'm the primary cook in my household, and my grandmother was the primary cook for our family. We had family events before she passed, and that kind of passed on to me. So when we have events, I'm cooking everything we're going to eat is vegan. So they're eating it if they want to eat, So that's kind of how it is. But for me, it was more about learning how to translate and adapt recipes, that were staples growing up to new vegan versions. And for my family, as long as the food tastes good, they're fine. Broadly speaking, I think generally I navigate like spaces with non-vegans I try to just be as fluid as possible. In those, in San Diego, there's only, I think 5% of the population is Black, and not a lot of, there's a handful of Black vegans that I know. And if I want to go hang out in spaces where my community is, it's not going to be a space that's predominantly vegan, right? So that would be isolating myself from people who I connect with. And I'm not going to, I don't want to do that. That's not going to be flourishing. It's not creating a flourishing space for me. But in spaces where I actually can get in those conversations and talk to people, I express to them and explain to them kind of what I think and why I think this way, and how it's connected to not just animals, but more specifically to people of color. And in that sense, I think it's been helpful. But the best way to me is just to cook for people, have people come over. I think that's been the best way I've been able to persuade people to consider something different or realize, what, you could make greens without pork and they still taste good, like it's these kinds of these crazy things that happen. I mean, the first time I made it for my home church, I was working in Compton. So first off, when the pastor makes something, like people are going to eat it because you're the pastor and that's just like appropriate, right? Like in a Black church, you're going to try it because the pastor made it. And so they're nervous. Like I see them in the line, like nervous, like, oh man, I got to try the pastor's greens, but they're not going to taste good. And And then when they eat them, and they're like, "Wow, these are great. This is a different kind of recipe." They're like, "Can I have the recipe to these?" And it was a total a slow conversion over the first couple of years I was there, but a conversion nonetheless, where people realized like, I can eat the same things I grew up eating, just cooked differently, and I still can connect with my identity. As as a Black person, with these things that I grew up eating, there's a way to eat them that's consistent with my cultural identity and my values, right? That I think uplift and benefit people of color, the environment, and just people in general.
Okay, I'm gonna need your greens recipe.
It's not mine. It's Bryant Terry's. That's all I'll say. Bryant Terry's, like he's one of the best chefs. So look at his stuff. It's great.
Well, and that brings us to our dessert course, sadly, because we're running out of time. But that's a great segue, because typically for our dessert course, we go around and each share something we've been thinking about or reading this week. But I thought, because of this special vegan episode, I would just ask each of you, because I have made my same lentil recipe like 5 times since I've been in quarantine. Can you just tell me some wonderful vegan dish you've been cooking, or a great recipe I should look up to get me out of my lentil rut?
I guess I've been cooking pretty simply at home. I just make bowls with a little bit of tofu or beans, and I've been getting fermented veggies from Fermenter pretty regularly. It's a really easy way to add some extra crunch and flavor on there. The one thing I did want to mention to you that I think you should definitely pick up a tub of is the cultured hazelnut spread from Fermenter. And the last one I had bok choy kimchi mixed in there. Like, I can't believe it's vegan. It's so delicious. Like, everything they make there is magical.
And Fermenter is a restaurant, correct?
So it's part of the Farm Spirit family.
Ah, okay. So it's part of the Farm Spirit restaurant family, but you can pick up takeout there, and it's in Portland.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I will definitely check that out. How about you, Talia?
Well, I was thinking about dessert, literally. So one of my things that I make almost nightly is banana ice cream. And I mean, ice cream is my favorite food. And my first job was at Cold Stone Creamery, where I OD'd on ice cream and realized, yeah, dairy does not really work for me. So that was the first clue that food makes me feel things, and I would like to not feel lousy because of the food I eat. So banana ice cream is my savior. It's just frozen bananas in a food processor, pureed until it's soft serve. And I, will throw in some mint from my little garden, or some frozen strawberries, add some chocolate chips or cacao nibs. And you can do whatever you want with it, but banana ice cream is my jam.
Oh my gosh, I'm making that for my kids tonight. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Yes.
Reverend Dr. Carter, apart from your greens or the greens that you cook, what else should I try?
So having a 14-month at home has drastically shifted my diet, in the sense of now he's at a point where he can kind of eat what we eat. So everything I make is things that I think are something he's going to like, and something that's easy for him to eat with his hands. And so I've been making, it's every few days, this tofu breakfast like scramble, where it's just some white potatoes, you just shred them up into hash browns, add some green pepper, red pepper, and I usually get sriracha infused tofu and kind of break that up, and I put some garlic powder, onion powder in that, and I put usually some vegan sausage and some vegan bacon, cook all that stuff up. Then I put it in the oven for 350 for about 10 minutes, and put some vegan cheese on there, let it melt, and boom, breakfast casserole. My son apparently likes spicy food, even though he's only 14 months.
I was going to say, you have a very adventurous eater for a child. My kids would have thrown that across the room. That is really impressive.
Yeah, I think that's something that we did to him, like just by the way I cook for my wife. And so how when she was pregnant, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I make. So his palate is definitely refined. So I think it's going to come back to bite me in the end, but right now I enjoy it. So.
You have a future restaurant critic under your roof there.
I know. I need to connect him with Waz. Like as soon as he gets a little bit older.
Well, sadly, we are out of time. But thank you so much, panelists. This has been so enlightening. I've learned so much. I've been so inspired. The Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter is an assistant professor at the University of San Diego, member of the board of Farm Forward, and author of the forthcoming book, The Spirit of Soul Food. Thank you for joining us. And Talia Pollock is the YouTuber, podcaster, and author behind Party in My Plants. Thank you for joining us from New York. And Waz Wu is a food blogger who contributes to Eater and also runs Veganizer PDX. Thanks for being here, Waz.
Thanks, Catherine.
Today's episode of The Foretop was recorded in remote locations all over the United States. I'm here in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, in my bedroom. Izzy Kramer is our tireless producer. Keelan King is our editor and sound guru and has been doing a lot of heavy lifting today as we've been recording. He also composed and performed our theme music. Special thanks to the web staff at OPB who bring our show to life on the Oregon Public Broadcasting website, as well as to sound supervisor Stephen Cray. You can check out our dedicated website, theforetop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, donate to the show, and reach out to us on social media. And if you've not already subscribed, please do on iTunes, NPR One, or Spotify, and please leave us a rating. I'm your host, Catherine Cole, and I am going to go prepare all the things that were recommended just now. I can't wait to make some banana ice cream and enjoy a delicious vegan dinner tonight. Bye-bye.